Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you so much for making the time to join the FEM Policyholder webinar. We appreciate the time that you've set aside to be with us here, and we believe that it's going to be an informative and really very useful session with a lot of information that will be available that's going to be shared with you. Just a few notices before we start. This is to confirm that a recording will be made available of the session. We will be posting it on our FEM website and all our social media platforms during the week. And then secondly, please keep an eye on the chat where further notices will be made throughout the session. Okay, so I think without wasting any more time, I will hand over to Ndibo Manyonga, who is our FEM Chief Executive Officer. And Ndibo, thank you, and I'll hand over to you to do the welcoming.
Thank you, Norma. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you to our webinar this morning. I'd also like to extend my own gratitude to our speakers for this morning, Faith, Sanjay, and Calvin. And in particular, for giving off their time to come and speak to us about these very pertinent topics or developments from an FEM perspective. So as you would have noted in your agenda, there are three key topics that we want to cover for today. The first being an update to our rebates and loadings methodology, which Sanjay will take you through. We also have Calvin, who is from Sena Financial Services, a partner of ours, who will be taking you through the return of earnings audit, and Gijs will take you through our FEM online portal. So I won't touch too much on all of those topics. Perhaps the only one that I want to reflect on in terms of a couple of points that I want to share from my perspective is the update to the rebates and loadings methodology. So as our policyholders will be aware, FEM has applied rebates and loadings historically, and indeed we will continue to do so. And we do so in terms of both the COID Act and our Memorandum of Incorporation. Our rebates are not guaranteed, It is up to the board of FEM to decide on an annual basis as to whether or not the rebates will be paid out. And the reason that is that, FEM as a mutual, and in terms of our memorandum of incorporation, cannot borrow any funds. So we do need to make sure that we protect the financial sustainability of the organization so that we can continue to do the good work that we are doing. So rebates cannot compromise that specific objective. So Sanjay will be taking you through the updates that we have made to the methodology, and this has been informed by feedback and input that we've received from different stakeholders, including our board itself, and indeed feedback that we've received from policyholders throughout the year. The core intent around rebates and loading still remains, which is that we want to use them as a tool to drive health and safety within the construction industry. This industry, unfortunately, still remains an industry that has got a high incidence of accidents in the workplace. We have tracked this over the years, and it's good to note that over the last couple of years, we have seen the accident frequency reduce, but it still remains unacceptable that we had more than 6,000 accidents reported on average over the last couple of years. And indeed, last year alone, we saw more than 45 deaths that were reported to FEM. We definitely need to do better by the employees within the construction industry. I also want to use this platform to just reinforce the fact that, our rebate methodology is not intended to discourage employers from reporting accidents to FEM. We do have isolated incidents of this where you've got policyholders who don't report accidents because they want to protect their rebate. Please, that is unacceptable, and that is definitely something that FEM has got a zero tolerance on. Access to benefits in the event of an accident in the workplace is a constitutional right that all employees within construction have, and any employer who prevents that could face serious legal, financial, and reputational implications. So we are definitely discouraging that. We are saying, please do report accidents when accidents happen in the workplace. And we as FEM will always apply the skills that we have and the knowledge that we have of COIDA to ensure that we are paying out benefits that are appropriate and that are befitting of accidents that are deemed to be eligible from a COIDA perspective. Employers should not leave it to themselves to make that decision about eligibility of those specific accidents. Okay, and then just to also highlight that in addition to paying rebates and applying loadings, we've also got other interventions that we focus on as FEM in terms of driving health and safety within the construction industry. And indeed, Sanjay, who's going to be speaking today, is intricately involved in that. He chairs our health and safety committee with different industry bodies and other stakeholders as well. What we also do as FEM is that we provide grants to industry bodies to assist construction companies with their health and safety initiatives. That is both to their members and to their non-members as well. Although I do want to encourage construction companies that are not members of any industry body to please consider membership, because there are definite benefits in that regard. But noting that non-membership is not going to be a reason why you don't get any assistance. So if you do need assistance with your health and safety interventions, please contact any of the industry bodies or engage with us, and we can facilitate those discussions. We all really need to rally together to drive down accidents within the construction industry and achieve the ideal of zero accidents and zero harm altogether. So that's really a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight on my side. Without further ado, I will hand over to Noma to just facilitate the introduction of our first speaker for today. And I hope all of you sit back and engage in the session and ask questions if you've got any specific aspects that you want clarity on. Thank you, Noma.
Thank you, Leah.
I just wanted to emphasize that there will be a dedicated Q&A session towards the end. However, I'd like to encourage you to post the questions in the chat box, and then we will attend to them. But certainly, we've got a dedicated Q&A session towards the end. Thank you. All right, so I'll hand over to Sanjay Malone, who is the FEM Chief Business Development Officer. And today, Sanjay will be taking us through the presentation. Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Norma, and good morning, everyone. Hope you're well and safe. I'm going to share a presentation. Okay, yeah, so thanks. Yeah, so just to give you some context, so the FEM merit rebate and loading methodology has over a period of about 20 years undergone a review, and the current review was done to check the principles and outcomes of the model to ensure sustainability of it. Right, there was also a requirement that the process should be equitable across policyholders, should be easy to understand and flexible enough to be adjusted based on the business needs, given the economic environment, as well as key strategic financial objectives of FEM. So I'm going to try and keep the presentation as simple as possible. We will share the recording and also to encourage you as well to engage with the FEM regional officers as well, the regional managers, the consultants as well, who will be able to provide you with more details should it be required. But just some context about FEM. So we provide workmen's compensation to the construction industry, and we'd like to thank you for being a policyholder of FEM. Definitely encourage you to refer employees in the construction industry who are not registered with FEM to register to become a policyholder of FEM. We've been in existence since 1936, and certainly when you look at the number of employees that we cover nationally, it's over 6,000 and over 300 construction workers. So when we talk about the mission and vision of FEM, and certainly we care about the quality of life for injured workers and their dependents, and from a COIDA perspective, which doesn't really relate to health and safety, but we talk about championing health and safety for the benefit of the construction industry and for society. Okay, so the merit rebates technically come from the COID Act, right? So it falls under Section 85, and so how we've then translated it into FEM, if, for example, an employer or a policyholder has a favorable claims experience, then FEM can pay a rebate to that particular policyholder, and that merit rebate is at the discretion of the board. And as you would heard in the board say that the merit rebates are not guaranteed as well. So technically speaking, if you have your claims costs are low, that will then translate into a merit rebate. The opposite of that, if there's a poor claims experience and we find also that there's recurrent experience of accidents taking place at a policyholder, that then warrants us from a system perspective to automatically load a policy. So when we say load a policy, we means that we load the tariff rates. And then just to maybe give you some context as well, that when you hear about merit rebates, not many people understand what the merit rebates are. But FEM being a mutual company, all the profits are distributed back to our policyholders. So that's one of the huge benefits that can make a significant contribution to the revenue of a company if there's proper health and safety protocols and low accidents that come through to FEM. So this gives you a high level overview in terms of how the breakdown of the premium. So technically we have the claims cost, which makes up a bulk of the claims costs, a bulk of the percentage that's deducted. So let's say if our premium income at FEM is 100%, then we will then reduce the claims costs. For example, in this case, it's 43%. We would then look at the operating costs or the management expenses of FEM, which is 15%. We would then look at reserving costs, for example, future claims, etc., at 20%. And then the portion that's available the profit or the amount that's left at the end will then be distributed back to policyholders in the form of a merit rebate. So that's just a technical breakdown in terms of how the premium is calculated to result in a merit rebate or a percentage payout of that. So this provides an overview since 2012 up until 2022, but just to maybe to indicate a proviso that the 2022 rebate has not been paid out, but in terms of what has been calculated, but we look at it as a percentage. So the orange bar indicates the premium income of FEM in 2012, for example, and the blue bar indicates the merit rebate that's been paid out to policyholders. And noting that we've seen a gradual increase in terms of premium from 2012 to 2017 and 2018, and then we would see in a decline. But noting that when we talk about 2012, we're looking at it retrospectively at the 2020 transaction year, 2013 will be 2011. But just this gives you just an overview in terms of how we calculate the rebate. So technically then this green line, sorry, would be the percentage of premium that we pay to a policy to all policyholders at FEM. So you can see that it's been just below the 35% over a period of time from 2012 to 2022, sorry. Okay, I'm just going to try and bring this down if possible. Okay. So this is a comparison of the merit rebates and loadings. So when we talk about the percentage of the premium that we pay back to policyholders, so you can see that, in fact, the percentage of merit rebate is at a much higher rate compared to the value of loading. So the loadings, you can see over a period of time since 2014, for that matter, have been below 5% of the premium. So it's a much smaller value in terms of the rebates that we pay out, but the total value of loadings from 2012 to 2022 was 245 million, which is quite significant. So that's why we try to encourage policyholders to, of course, have lower accidents and ensure that there's proper health and safety protocols on site to prevent the policy from being loaded. So the next slide will give you a good indication in terms of the values. I did present the value of the loadings, which was just over 225 million, but noting that the value of merit rebates from 2012 to 2022 is calculated at 2.44 billion, right? So that's a huge amount based on the fact that we cover just over 6,000 policyholders nationally. I think that amount is comparable to other insurers in the country as well. And then over and above that, when we talk about the reserving, so any additional funds or surplus funds are then allocated back to policyholders in the form of additional rebates. So for example, in 2014, we paid out 100 million rands to policyholders. And then in 2016, when that huge amount of 1.034 billion was paid out to FEM policyholders. So certainly, it makes a huge benefit in terms of working safer and being a policyholder of FEM. When we combine the two, and just to give you an overview of the amount, that total value of rebates from 2012 to 2022 has been calculated at just over 3.54 billion, which is a significant amount, especially being plowed back to the construction industry. So just some definitions when we talk about underwriting, and that's some of the terminology that I will be speaking about in this presentation. So technically, if you a policyholder at FEM, you will then submit your return of earnings. We have an underwriting department at FEM who will then go through it, checking to ensure that your number of employees and the value of the earnings correspond to what's on the payroll. Then we will then calculate it based on the rate. If there's a split of rate, they will take that process into consideration and then send through an assessment based on the risk category or the risk or the subclass that you are currently registered in, right? So if there's a loading, that they will then apply the loading, but certainly what it means is that the premium, the process through which an individual or an institution takes on financial risk for a fee. So that premium that you pay through to the FEM is technically from an underwriting department, how we then calculate it based on your particular risk category. Okay, the loss ratio. So the loss ratio an insurer incurs on paying claims as a percentage of premiums earned. So technically what it means is that if your premium is 100 rand and if your claims cost is 10 rands, then it means that your loss ratio is 10%. So that is what we will then determine based on whether you will qualify for the merit rebate or whether you will then be loaded dependent on your loss ratio. So that is just a terminology for your benefit. So I did speak about the overview in terms of how the premium is calculated, but also noting that we had to change this model based on the funds that were available for FEM based on the ability to distribute it. So what we've also experienced over about 7 years, where we've actually had to pay more than what the underwriting profits were available for distribution. So this has two objectives, is one for the company and then also for the employer as well, or the policyholder, so that what we've also experienced in the past is where we looked at it from a 2 years retrospective, we then moved it to a 1 year retrospective. I'll speak a bit about it in the next slide. But just to give you an overview is that we found policyholders would indicate that it takes, the incidents occurred 2 years ago and they're only finding out about it 2 years later. So what we try to do is then take in the feedback into consideration and then amend this rebate, right? So technically, I'm not going to go into too much of detail on this particular slide. It may result in a confusion, but just to give you the indication that what we will do is we will first calculate the profit pool for all policyholders in the period under review. So at FEM, we have our CFO, Yusuf, and then he'll do all the calculations based for the assessment year and then determine what profit will be available for distribution back to policyholders. There will be instances where a policyholder will not qualify for a merit rebate or will not be loaded as well, but also noting that the additional premium collected from loadings will not go into the pool, but would be sufficient to cover the loss ratio. So meaning that we've not changed the loading policy at this particular point, although it will also follow a 1 year retrospective procedure, but certainly we will be reviewing the loading policy later in this year. So the main changes from the old methodology to the new rebate methodology would be that we're shifting from a 2 years retrospective to a 1 year retrospective, right? So in 2023, we will then now look at the 2022 claims year, some of the alignment of the periods, but also to maybe give you an indication that we anticipate that the COID amendment bill will be approved fairly shortly. It's with the presidency at this point for approval. I will take you through a few of the amendments a bit later in the presentation, but also noting from an FEM perspective is that there's a differentiation between the assessment year, which is from the 1st of March up until the end of February, whereas FEM's financial year is from the 1st of January up until the end of December. So we are currently under discussions to review the FEM financial year to align it with the assessment year. But so we will then be communicating more information once that's been concluded. So the policyholder premium that's been used, there's no change there. So it's an assessed premium from the 1st of March up until the end of February. The policy claims cost. So this is a significant shift where we would then review the claims cost from the 1st of March up until the 28th of February. We will then exclude RAF recoveries and admin fees as well will be excluded. So we always had this debate as well with policyholders previously during meetings where they would raise concern about the 12.5% admin fee that we would raise on a claim, but that will then fall away under the new rebate methodology. Okay, so the annual financial statements will then be finalized and then we'll make a determination in terms of what the allocation will be for policyholders. I will take you through examples which will maybe make it a bit more simpler in terms of understanding. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the old rebate methodology. It can be a bit technical on this side, but just to focus on the new rebate methodology, which is a policyholder contribution to net underwriting profits. So the net underwriting profit is calculated as the difference between the premium less all the claims costs, outstanding claims costs, reserve requirements, and operating costs as well. So technically, if you look at yourself in the company that you work for, all the income that you receive from your clients, and then all the deductions in terms of paying the suppliers, all the staffing costs will then result in your final profit, and in fact that profit can be that will then be distributed back to our policyholders. So technically, just to give you an example of that scenario. So the qualifiers, there have not been any changes on this. So the one is that the policy must be active at FEM. There must be no outstanding balance owing to FEM. The policy must have been with FEM for at least 1 year. There must be the policy must have been assessed by the end of June of the following year, and the policy must have declared actual premiums for the year. So technically what it means is that we currently in our new assessment period, which started on the 1st of March 2023, the returns have to be submitted through to FEM, and the returns have to then be assessed. We will then send through the assessed premium to the policyholder. That assessed premium has to then be paid by the end of June this year. So we're then going to be reviewing the 2022 transaction year. So the policyholder rebate calculation. So we then talk about a break-even loss ratio, but also to keep it as simple as possible. So technically, we spoke about the FEM premium, which is 100% less all the claims costs, the outstanding claims costs, reserves, requirements, and operating costs. In this scenario, we're taking it as an example at 65%, and that then results in a break-even loss ratio of 35%. So we can't upfront tell you, for example, in 2024 or 2025, what the break-even loss ratio is going to be. We will then have to wait for the financial statements of the company to be concluded, and thereafter make a determination in terms of what the break-even loss ratio is. So just to maybe put it in a scenario, and we have a policyholder, for example, where the loss ratio is 0%, so meaning that the premium they paid us is 1,000 Rand, and there were no claims costs, then technically speaking, that particular policy will then qualify for 350 Rands as a merit rebate, just to give you a scenario of that, right? So as the loss ratio increases to 5%, 10%, the rebate payable to the policy will decline on a sliding scale as well, until we get to 35%, where then there will be a 0% rebate payable to the policyholder. So for example, we got policyholder A, the assessed premium, and in this scenario, we talk about the break-even loss ratio at 35%. Okay, so let's say we have policyholder A who's paid FEM 100,000 Rand premium. They had no claims for the 2022 transaction year. This then results in a 0% claims ratio. They would then qualify for a merit rebate of 35% of their premium, right? So the rebate payable would then be 35,000. We then have scenario where policyholder B, whose premium is also 100,000, and the claims paid was then 10,000. The claims ratio would then be 10%, or the loss ratio would be 10%, and they would then qualify for a rebate of 25% or 25,000. So you can see that how this particular examples, as the claims paid increases and the loss ratio increases, so does there's a decline in terms of the rebate that will be payable to a policyholder, right? For example, in this scenario, where an employer or a policyholder has 40,000 Rands worth of claims, that means that the claims ratio is then 40%. So 40% means that they're 5% over what the break-even loss ratio is. That particular policyholder will not qualify for a merit rebate, right? So that will then be 0. And a similar scenario for policyholder F, where they've had 50,000 Rands worth of claims, and then they will not qualify for the merit rebate. But I think one of the benefits as well is when we look at it 1 year retrospective, we also be able to then address the health and safety issues fairly quickly as well. So we, for example, in 2023, we will then review the 2022 transaction year or the 2022 assessment year, and then you will then be able to say, okay, this is what your outcome is for 2023. And then once you then reach 2024, so it's a much quicker turnaround time in terms of addressing health and safety issues. Okay. So there is going to be a switchover period, right? There's a process to phase out the old merit rebate methodology. And so what we've decided is then the payment based on the old merit rebate methodology, which is on a 2 years retrospective. So technically, we in 2023, we will then review the 2021 transaction year. We will then be paying out that rebate based on the old merit rebate, on the old methodology during July of this year. And then the new rebate methodology, we will then be paying out on the during October. So that's based, the new rebate methodology will then be based on the 2022 year, right? So it's a 1 year retrospective versus the 2 year retrospective. So I think it's a huge benefit for policyholders, where you would then be qualifying for 2 rebates in this particular year. Okay, so some provisos as well. So I did mention about the COID Amendment Bill, and what the Section 85 indicates is that the this particular section will then take into consideration the employee who participates in rehabilitation of employees. So if that's the case, then well, in this instance, FEM may give such an employer a rebate on any assessment paid or payable by him or her. Right, so this is an amendment in the COID that's going to be approved fairly soon. We are still determining from a business perspective in terms of how to apply it, and we in consultation with the compensation fund, Rand Mutual as well. And then once we get clarity in terms of the directive, we will then implement it accordingly, but noting that we will be sending out communication of this once it does change. Okay, so just to maybe mention that this provision does not apply to the new merit rebate methodology, which is if an employer participates in the rehabilitation of employers as prescribed. So the amendment of the financial year as well, so that will be changing. So the current financial year is from the 1st of March up until the end of February the following year. Under the amendment bill, that will then change to align to the Public Finance Management Act, which will be from the 1st of April up until the end of March the following year. So there will be a bit of a transition, and we will be communicating to policyholders once that change, but that also will have an impact, a direct impact in terms of the merit rebates as well. So one of the benefits of being with FEM and noting that the tariff, will be increasing gradually over a period of time for our main subclasses, which is building and the civil engineering sector, right? So we can also see heavy electrical maintenance and glassworks, where these particular rates, for example, civil construction, which is 2.36%, which for 2023 will then increase to 2.5 in 2024. And then it will eventually reach 2.65 in 2025. But noting that the merit rebate has a huge impact in terms of a company's ability then to mitigate this, right? So although the rates are going to be increasing, then translating into a higher premium, the merit rebate, if a company is able to, for example, obtain 30% of their premium back, will have a material impact in terms of the financial stability and or the financial outlook for a particular policyholder. So just to maybe bring to your attention that health and safety is of critical importance. Some of the other changes would be Schedule 4, so meaning that the minimum compensation for a permanent disability that does not result in a pension where the severity is less than 30%, for example, will now be a minimum of over 90,000 rand. So that's a huge increase in terms of claims cost, right? So part of the COID amendment bill, which is in its final stages of being approved, will be the focus on rehabilitation and return to work of injured workers. The next point, which is of key importance, and I know that we also will have health and safety managers on this particular webinar, but also maybe to bring to your attention that if the accident is attributable to the serious and willful misconduct of the employee, compensation will still be payable to the employee in terms of the act. So that's a major shift in terms of the current act, where if there's serious or willful misconduct that's been suspected, you can indicate that on the employer's report of accident. And then from an FEM perspective, we will then adjudicate and determine whether to accept liability or whether to repudiate the claim. The continuation of pension to dependents on the death of an injured employee who's receiving a pension will continue regardless of the cause of death. The recoveries from the road accident fund will no longer occur, and then penalties for non-compliance with COIDA. So the penalties has been set at 10%, but we will then be sending out more communication as we get closer to the approval of the COIDA amendment bill. Okay, suggestions to keep your loss ratios low, and I think we also have, possibly HR management, and we have individuals from the finance department as well on this webinar. But also, I think it's a very interrelated process between health and safety and then the merit rebates as well. So encouraging the construction industry and policies at large as well to perform regular inspections to ensure health and safety compliance on site. I think critically these points, where we would find that there are many larger organizations who are able to implement health and safety protocols and adhere to compliance and regulations. But I think there's definitely a constraint with the SMMEs. So encouraging where we have large policyholders, especially some of them are on this webinar, for example, from Stephen Stocks and WHO, to encourage your subcontractors to also work safely. Providing adequate health and safety training is a critical component of changing the tide in terms of reducing the number of fatalities. And where we've seen over a period of time from 2000 that they've been around an average of 72 fatalities that we've covered in the construction industry just under FEM. So health and safety culture is critical, and definitely ensuring that will result in a material reduction in terms of the number of accidents. I'm not going to go through to each point, but also encouraging policyholders at FEM to review your statistics, engage with the regional officers as well. We have the statistics available for your individual policy, noting the critical cause of accidents, and trying to implement measures to prevent them from going forward would also result in a material reduction in accidents. Some of the frequently asked questions is, do I need to apply for a merit rebate, which is often a question we get asked, and the response to that is no. So merit rebates are system calculated and are paid automatically if due. Okay, so when must premiums be paid to qualify for a merit rebate? So it's quite critical that the merit rebate the policyholder will only qualify for a merit rebate to be paid if the premium is paid by the 30th of June in a particular year. So meaning that we're in 2023, and once the policy or the ROE has been assessed, please ensure that that premium is paid by the 30th of June if the policyholder does qualify for that merit rebate. Are merit rebates guaranteed? No, in this case. So merit rebates are subject to board approval. And the next point is, are policyholders liable if there's an underwriting loss at FEM? The response to that is no. Are merit rebates linked to the number of claims submitted or the value of claims costs? So this is also a question that we field from policyholders. And in this case here, when we talk about merit rebates, it's not linked to the number of claims you submitted. So you can have 100 very minor claims and the claims cost could be minimal. So that would not have a material impact. But what does have an impact is if you have one claim that's quite significant in terms of costs, will then have an impact on your loss ratio and then may result in a reduction of your merit rebate, or in fact a loading as well. Okay, so that then takes me to the end of my presentation, but just to thank everybody for attending. I think also the case is the merit rebate is a huge motivation for improving health and safety in construction sites. So where you can refer employers to FEM to register and where we can provide the quota cover for them, we will be very thankful for that. So please do get in touch with your regional office or the consultants from Johannesburg, Cape Town, or Durban, and we'll certainly be able to assist to register your subcontractors or transfer them from the compensation fund. So thank you. I'll now hand back to Norma.
Thank you, Sanjay. I do hope that I'm not overboard this time. Apologies for those issues earlier. So I'm now hand over to Trace McIntosh, who is the FEM Chief Information Officer. Trace will be taking us through the launch or demo of FEM Online. Thank you, Trace. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Norma. I think, yeah, we note that the sound was also a little bad there, so apologies for that. But I think to repeat what Norma was saying, and I suppose let me share my ugly mug for a minute, just so I can say hi to everyone on the call. I will stop sharing when I share the presentation and demo, just so that I'm not looking off screen to my side screen and looking a little odd. I will be sharing just some background around FEM's online presence and the new FEM Online or FEM Online website for policyholders that we will be launching. And so in that vein, let me then share my screen. There we go. And you should be able to see that screen now. And then I will also just turn off my ugly mug for the moment. And so to go through the various items in this session, I'll ask my co-hosts as well, perhaps just to keep an eye on the chat, since it's tricky to keep an eye on the chat while you're presenting. FEM Online and internet generally, so internet and specifically the use of internet in South Africa really only started in the 1990s, late 1990s. I know elsewhere in the world it was available before that, but here we were a little slow to adopt. And many companies started using websites sort of towards the mid to late 90s, depending on their client base, their target market. So from FEM side, we launched our first website in 2001. And it was also in line with what most people were doing, providing a place where we could provide information to stakeholders. And so that particular site has been available for 23 years. Let me just check. I see Annalise says she cannot see the screen share. Is everyone okay with the screen share?
Yeah, I can see it, okay.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I see there were two questions in the chat, Sanjay, that you can maybe respond in the chat, or we can actually just at the end of the Q&A just deal with those. so for the past 23 years, FEM site has been available. And so the initial site was, again, in line with what was happening to disseminate useful information. It had no interactive elements to it. It was really just a sharing of information. Interesting little fun fact was the domain when we registered it, our registered short name is FEM, and we're known as FEM, though some people call us FEMA as well. Which is confusing for any American people where that's their emergency services domain. But when we registered our first website way back then, the FEM domain was unfortunately not available. Someone else was sitting on it already. So we registered under fema.co.za, and we have subsequently obtained that domain, and we have switched most of our services across to that domain. Both of those websites, both FEM and FEMA, do work regardless of which one you go to. It goes to the same website, and we have kept both active for various reasons related to security and people wanting to buy and sell websites, and also not to confuse stakeholders. We will be doing a final switch across to the fem.co.za website, and we'll then be looking to make that the primary site used for everyone going forward. Okay, so the website obviously has been revamped several times over the past 23 years and updated with new information, refreshing the look and feel and aligning with the current trends and FEM's brand. So besides the information about FEM and the useful stakeholder information we provide there, we did over time add various features like posting our newsletters there, giving various communications on health and safety campaigns and other campaigns and media presentations we may be running, publishing of health and safety information and accident stats, and I'll speak to that a little bit more, creating specific interactive areas for groups of stakeholders to interact electronically with FEM. And specifically there, we will be talking about the policyholder portal or the website for policyholders, but we also have one specifically for medical service providers, commonly known as IMS, and the policyholders one is currently known as ROE. Okay, so that's sort of the look and feel of the current website. Our current website address, as I mentioned, was www.fem.co.za. And on that site, it is still the main informational site. You'll find all sorts of interesting information about FEM, about FEM services. You can access the accident statistics there as well. Any of our career postings are there, legal information as required. Media like the recording of this session will also be shared there, and various downloads of various forms and things like that will be there. Okay, so statistics is the other part that has played quite an important role. And so on statistics, FEM has been publishing IOD health and safety stats for over 20 years. We are pretty much one of the only sources of IOD related health and safety statistics for the construction industry in South Africa. And we have made enhancements to the way that we publish, the publications we disseminate on statistics in the health and safety and COIDA space. Again, we've tried to make it easier without taking away the ability to download or aggregate data to do analysis, and that was intentional because, again, many of those statistics have been used, possibly even by some on the webinar, to do their doctoral thesis and for other publications that you may have seen in the media. Again, the only restrictions on using that data has been to not modify or misrepresent that data and just to quote the source of that data. And so that's basically what we've been doing with that data for the past 20 years. Additional tools were introduced to support our industry bodies and specifically our stakeholders, allowing filtering of data for various FEM and then MBA regions, though the MBA regions are tied to the country regions. The earliest data available that's on the site is from the year 2000, and that data is refreshed as snapshots every quarter. So the most recent data snapshot would be December 2022, where the oldest one would be 2000 month 3. The next update will be at the end of March 2023. There has been a request that we publish these more frequently. Again, we've had a lot of debate and discussion around these as to how frequently to do this, because often with the number of accidents happening on a monthly basis, it doesn't really move the dial in terms of the overall trend. And in the beginning of the year, it can make it very volatile. So data can be filtered by those snapshots to compare how those trends have developed over time, which is one of the key points about producing those snapshots. Then to speak about other things that are available there, the data is broken into various statistic types. And so we have always, though, carried the basic information related to injuries on duty, or IOD, and it aligns to the way that IODs are reported in other countries worldwide. I'll touch on that a little bit more. There is a project underway in South Africa over the past year or so with the International Labour Organization, or ILO, to ensure all IOD reporting aligns with the international standard sets that have been set. And that is with the intention of publishing those statistics and being able to compare statistics across countries to see how things are doing. Because if everyone reports differently and on different things, then it makes it very difficult to compare different regions. So accident data will generally show number of incidents in a period, and then you can categorize that by various ways, so showing industry comparisons, costs of incidents, changes over time, splits by accident types, differentiating between accidents and occupational diseases, causes of accidents and types of injuries. Okay, so FEM statistic types. So there are geographic factors that I've mentioned already. So the FEM region, or the MBA region, as we call it on the site, which is basically the country geographic regions. And then other factors can be filtered within that. So the causes are aligned to the standards mentioned in terms of ILO and international reporting standards, but some of those you will have seen if you've ever looked for stats anywhere. You can see things like fall from heights, which is fall on a different level in our categorization, or fall on same level, or striking against, struck by, caught in or on or between, motor vehicle accidents, contact with electricity, or contact with temperature extremes. So those are sort of just some of the basic categories that you will see reported on by us and by others out in the market. So that's not all the causes, but it does align, as I mentioned, with the international methods of collecting these type of stats. And so on that basis, you could use those categories to compare different regions, countries, etc., etc. Again, if you look at that on its own, that doesn't give you a lot of information on each individual type. So struck by, well, struck by what? And so that's where the next set of categorizations come in, where we look at what's available on the site, are things like nature, location, and agency. So nature relates to the type of injury, so like a muscle injury, bone injury, penetrating wound, those types of things. There's a whole host more. Location is not where it happened, but it relates to the location of the injury, so arm, leg, head, trunk, etc. And then agency, and that relates to what caused the accident. What was the agency of the accident? And that would be things like saws, presses, grinders, and many others. There's a whole category list. So those are what are included on the site's stats that we publish. There are additional dimensions, so agency part, which breaks down the part of that particular thing that caused the injury, occupation, and various other coding methods such as ICD-10. That does get broken down further, but for simplicity, nature, location, and agency are provided to give some method of differentiation and compare where the problem cases are. So I won't go further into that. That pretty much covers it for the statistics. The data provided is the focus is on making it easy to download. But the future plans as we revamp the new site is to include various graphs, infographics, and those type of resources that can then just be downloaded and used as they are, without removing the ability to actually utilize the data to tell the story that you're wishing to tell. Okay, that's just a quick screenshot of how that statistics look. So you'll see there are selectors for those various dimensions that I spoke about, and you can see currently, so I've gone from 2020 to 2022 in terms of selection for all regions, and I've done it by cause. And so if we have a look at the different causes, you'll see awaiting information, so things that are not yet complete, caught in or in between, contact with temperature extremes, and so on. And you'll see it shows you the percentage of accidents that were for that category, how many of those were fatal. So you can see motor vehicle accidents are still a concern for us and are what causes the largest number of fatal accidents in our industry. Number of days lost for that particular incident, number of accidents, which aligns to the percentage, permanent disabilities not resulting in a pension. So that's where his disability is less than 30%. So it doesn't result in a pension, but does result in a lump sum. Pensions or permanent disabilities resulting in a pension. So that's where it's 30% or more, where that injured employee will be receiving a pension for the rest of his life. And then it also compares the average cost per accident for each of these types or causes, which then gives you an idea that something like a motor vehicle accident is the highest average cost at the moment for 2022. And so that's something where we can focus our health and safety efforts to see what we can do. The link to the site is included there, but it is also accessible from our main website if you just go to online tools and accident stats. Then another point on the old and new site is the letter of good standing validation. So we sometimes call it a log, or some people refer to it as a log, which is a bit weird, but it is a key document that provides policyholders with a way to prove that they are in good standing. Why would they want to do that? It is a requirement for many tenders and contracts and on sites as stipulated in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And there's very many reasons for why you would want this type of document, but primarily the purpose of it is a mechanism to ensure workers' rights are protected by ensuring that compensation insurance is in place. So again, to the CEO's comments at the beginning, COIDA, its whole purpose is to look after injured workers, to make sure that their rights are protected. And in FEM's case, we also then try and balance that with looking after the rights of the policyholders to make sure that their funds are not being spent inappropriately. The challenge, though, sometimes on these letters of good standing is to make sure that the letter that you have is valid. And when I say letter, I mean, I don't differentiate between electronic or physical, but to make sure the letter is valid and in force. And sometimes we have seen cases of fraud on these, and those do get prosecuted. So to allow a mechanism to validate an FEM letter of good standing, FEM has included a tool on its website that would include the old website, which has been there for many years. And that tool, then you take the unique identifier on the letter of good standing, you punch it into the field provided, and then when you validate, it will tell you whether this letter of good standing is valid or not. So if we have a look at some examples, I know these on the left are a little small, but I'll speak to what they are. So this is on the old website, ROE, which is still current. And you'll see there's a menu that says verify letter of good standing, which is accessible to anyone who goes to the site. There's a box for you to type in your validation code and you can hit verify. Once you do that, it will then display the details for that letter of good standing, which would include a policy number, a name, the references that are relevant, the nature of the business they carry out, and then the issue date and expiry date. So on the old site, you'll see there's not really much difference between a valid letter and an invalid letter. On the new site, which is these colorful ones on the right, we have tried to make it as intuitive and clear as possible. So when you use a valid code, you'll see it tells you it's verified, it's valid, still gives you the relevant details you need. If it's a code that has already expired, so as with the second one, you can see it's orange just to indicate it is a valid letter, but it's no longer valid at this point. It expired in this case in 2019. And then the final one is if you just type in some random stuff or you type in an invalid code, it will tell you the code you've entered is invalid. So that touches on verifying letters of good standing. I know my time is running short, so I'll speed up a little bit. So the first policyholder portal that we provided within FEM was introduced in the late 2000s and started as a very basic portal. It allowed things like information about the policyholder, so you could check if the information we had was still valid. information on previous assessments done. So that's as a result of the returns that you've given us, information on claims that you've registered, information on rebates that we've paid to you over time, and accident statistics again, but specifically now for the policyholder, not for the industry as a whole. So initially this was just informational, but over time but specific to that policyholder. And over time we added additional functionality to make it more of an interactive two-way communication. So things like requesting information changes, editing existing information where perhaps what you had provided to us before, like an email address, was no longer valid as you changed your email address, and then you could update us with the correct email address on the site without having to send any letters or anything. Completing your return of earnings, that was for us a big one, just in terms of trying to streamline and make that process much quicker and convenient for policyholders to be able to process the returns of earnings and issue your assessments. And then more recently, in the past number of years, was registration of a claim. And these were also enhanced over time. And so where we are right now is the most recent revamp of the site is about to launch, with the aim of further improving the site based on the feedback we have received in collaboration with policyholders. So reasons for changing the existing site. The site is based on older technology. It is managed for FEM by a third party at the moment. It is therefore not quick or easy to make changes to the current site. The site does need to be aligned with current best practices. The site isn't aligned with the current look and feel and branding of FEM, and even with what would be considered best practice in the market. With the current environment, and I'm talking more security there is a need to further improve security. We have had, touch wood, no incidents thus far, but again, we don't want to tempt fate, so we will increase security, introducing things like 2FA, which I'll speak to in a bit, improving and streamlining the registration process. Some feedback we got is that registration process was not as user-friendly as it could be, and then some of the overall functions required an overhaul to make them more user-friendly. Some of the processes that you had to follow needed to be simplified. So in terms of registering a claim, as an example, there was too much information required, so many policyholders just sent us a manual form rather than completing all the information required. So that's something that's been streamlined on the new site. There were also many features that have been requested by policyholders over time that we can start introducing on the new site, on the new technology. So one of the things is simplified registration, as I mentioned. So the current authentication and registration is based on best practice. It ties into the Microsoft Azure infrastructure for those that are interested, and uses Active Directory business to client functionality. This allows for many of the enhanced security features over and above the standard security features we already have. It does not directly link a user to a policy or a registered site user to a policy, but and it doesn't restrict you to an email address, which was the issue previously, but it now allows you to register using an email address as an identifier and a cell phone number as well for security. Once those details have been entered, if they match what FEM already has, the profile can be automatically authorized. And for protection of policyholders and their data, if all the details do not match, then further validation is done with FEM staff to ensure that unauthorized individuals do not gain access to your data. Once the account is authorized, it can then be linked to one or more FEM policyholders or FEM policies. We do have policyholders that have multiple policies with us for multiple divisions of larger companies and so on. So this facilitates that. And then two-factor authentication, or 2FA as I referred to it earlier, means a second factor like a phone using SMS or an authenticator can be used to ensure the security that of the access to the site. So you don't have Russian hackers coming in and trying to access your information. So the FEM Online rollout, given the high volumes at this time of the year due to the return of earnings process, which has just kicked off now at the beginning of March, we will be rolling out the new site in a phased approach. So we don't want to disrupt what is happening already. Several policyholders have been engaging with us for the past year or longer just around design and testing, and they will be enabled first on the site to make sure that what we've discussed and implemented makes sense to them at least. We will then be offering policyholders the opportunity to switch. So on the old site, you will get a pop-up that will prompt you to register for the new site. The pop-up can be delayed, paused for a period of time until you are ready to do the switch. And once the switch is done, then the old profile and the old site will be deactivated. Important information will be communicated during that switch, and this would include making sure all the processes you were busy with, so if you were halfway done with a claim or halfway done with the return of earnings, those are completed before you do the switch. So on that note, then I will quickly switch across to do a little demo. Live demos are notoriously fun, but you should now be able to see the FEM website on your screens. And so this is what I spoke about. So you can see all the various services, online services, the accident statistics we spoke about, careers, some legal information, etc. on the base FEM site. At the moment, if you go to the policyholders website, then it will take you, okay, I also wanted to touch on, at the moment we are running the Zero is No Accident Health and Safety campaign, which if you click on the Zero campaign, it has its own sort of platform or website that you can actually go in and get all the information you need related to the Zero is No Accident initiative. If you, however, click on the services, online services, and for policyholders, you'll get to the existing FEM policyholder portal. This is sometimes known as the ROE site, which actually stands for Return on Earnings, though the site does a lot more than that. It gives a little bit of basic information. It does prompt people that are service providers that we're looking for their site with a link to go there. There is an email address for assistance. There is a user guide that will give you the details you need in terms of how to register and so on. The basic functionality here is to click to go and log on, to register if you have not yet, and if you've forgotten your password, there's a mechanism for you to recover it via the email you have provided to us previously. There's also now a banner telling you about the site that is coming soon, and I'll touch on that a bit more again. And then on this site, there's the old verify letters of good standing link where you can click on to get to the verify letters of good standing. There's also the statistics that are available to everybody before logging in on injuries or subclasses that you will have seen that basically looks like this. So if we look at these, you'll see from the screenshot I sent you, this is pretty much the same. You can manipulate these filters up top here, and that will give you the various information. And obviously from here, you can download or print or do whatever you need in terms of this information. Okay, that's the validation letter, which I've already showed you.
Time.
Oh, damn. Thanks, Sanjay. I'll wrap up now quickly. So on the new site, this is how the new site currently looks. Again, you can go and create an account. You can register a policyholder. There's a lot of more information around what's available here. Your letters of good standing and statistics are still available there, and also the link to Zero campaign. And then basically I will end it at that. So not a lot of time for the presentation, but thank you everybody. And thanks Sanjay for the reminder.
Yeah, thank you, Gijs, for that presentation. I think, yeah, we're looking forward to the new FEM online system, and I think it's going to have a huge impact in terms of the efficiencies from a ROE submission and claims as well. So we'll be looking forward to the sharing of that presentation, and there will also be prompts on the ROE portal as well. The next presenter is Calvin Hope from Center Financial Services. So maybe just to give you some context, in 2022, we piloted the project where we audited the return of earnings of certain policyholders, and we did find that there was a material impact in terms of the declaration on the return of earnings and perhaps also under declarations as well that we had also seen as well. So we've then decided then in 2023 to permanently implement this process, but also to maybe give you some insight as well, is that it's not just an FEM process, but it's also from the compensation fund and Rand Mutual as well, who also audit the return of earnings. I'm now going to hand over to Calvin. Morning, Calvin. You're on mute, Calvin.
Much. Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you all participants, and thank you for the great opportunity. I will be sharing a presentation and really talking through the return of earnings audit process that we will be following. So I'll stop sharing, or at least my video, and then I'll start sharing my presentation. I trust you can see my presentation.
Not yet, Kelvin, so I'll try and share it from my side.
Thank you. Thanks, Sanjay. Really, second slide. Return of earnings audit, in essence, is being done by Sena Financial Services, who is a partner to FEM. And as Sanjay indicated, we started in 2016, and in the same vein, the audits also started roundabout in that vein in the RMA space and the like. And as Sanjay indicated, it is an industry-wide audit, following a notice from the Compensation Fund in 2018. In terms of which all policyholders will be subjected to a return of earnings audit. The ROE assessment may be referred for audit due to the following reasons. If there is a credit assessment or a considerable decrease in the amount of ROE declared from prior year, policyholders have less favorable claims experience than those of policyholders in the comparable business. And FEM will then obviously select the policyholders that they have identified and that they will then subject to the ROE audit that we will undertake. Next slide. I think it's important for us to realize and appreciate the purpose of the ROE audit is to ensure that FEM has and maintains accurate employer-employee data for the purpose of COIDA regulatory compliance and fraud prevention, as was mentioned earlier as well by one of the speakers. In terms of Section 81 of COIDA, employees are required to keep a register or other record of the wages, time worked, payments for piecework and overtime, and all other prescribed particulars relevant to their employees for at least 4 years after the date of the last submission to FEM. Next slide. As you well know, earnings that are to be declared includes all earnings of the employees, so casual employees, contract or subcontractors, employee earnings, persons that's provided by a labor broker, their earnings, fixed-term employees, permanent employees, managers, and also directors. So those are all the earnings that ought to be declared by an employer to FEM. Next slide. It is an annual process. As you all know, the sum of year, all earnings needs to be declared, and all employers must declare all salaries paid to their employees. Can't stress this more than we can. Applicable period is 1 March of previous year to 28th Feb of the current year. And all the estimated earnings must also be declared. Just for your information, I've given you an update of the current earnings that we have for this period, 1 March 23 to 28 Feb 2024, which leaves a maximum amount of 5,635.20 per employee per annum. So that's the current earnings for this particular year. Thanks. The process we follow during this RE audit is as follows. As in the past, we as Sena will contact you directly, all the policyholders that's been identified based on the criteria I set out before. And we'll contact you directly and we'll ask certain information or documentation from you, which will be necessary for us to conduct this audit. And this documentation will include the following: an affidavit, if there is a credit assessment, reasons for that variance needs to be provided in an affidavit. We'll also require, and will require from the targeted employer, audited or independent revenue, certainly the reviewed annual financial statements that we need to see. We'll also require a detailed payroll report. We'll also require the SARS EMP 501 tax clearance, also the SARS EMP 201. That gives us a year 501, and also EMP 201 gives us a monthly indication of the declaration for that particular year. We'll also require return of earnings for the current year, and also the previous years that we will be embarking the audit on. If the employer or policyholder is represented by a person acting in their stead, like a consultant or an attorney, will then ask for a power of attorney to indicate who that person is, and that's acting on behalf of the policyholder, employer that is providing that information. In addition, we will also ask for the company's completed UI 19 declaration and UIF submission. That gives us an indication of the employees that the employer has on its payroll and that they are declaring UIF for. Not that we are doing an audit for the UIF, but it's more in reference to making sure that the employees that the employer has on its payroll is properly provided for in terms of the reporting. We will also ask for the employer's detailed annual UIF submissions. Those are the records or documentation that we will seek during this audit process. We may also request any other information that's not listed. The next slide, Sanjay. We may request payslips, copies of certain employees' contracts. That is to really verify information on the payroll reports. In some instances, we may conduct site visits to interview relevant people to clarify some information. This documentation is necessary to ensure that FEM has the correct information in respect of the employer and the employees. This will further ensure that the correct premium is charged and paid for, and that the correct cover is also received by the employer. All information to support or dispute findings should be submitted to SENA. So we want to stress this: all information to support or dispute findings should be submitted to SENA and not to FEM in this instance during this audit process. Next slide. During our audit process in the past, we have picked up certain common areas of concern, which we term as general findings from previous audits. Several employers previously audited provided insufficient information and did not provide the documentation by the agreed time. This unfortunately caused an undue delay in the finalization of the process. Employers did not provide the following important information, which includes detailed payroll, detailed UIF records, correct return of earnings of previous years and current years, or correct headcount for the previous years and the current year. In some cases, employers ignored letters, ignored communication, and others provided explanations to FEM as opposed to SENA, and to justify or correct a wrong that was already committed. Next slide. There are certainly serious consequences if an employer or policyholder does not adhere to the audit request, bearing in mind that it's a notice that was given by the regulator. And working with FEM, we're trying to make sure that we execute properly for the benefit as indicated. It's important that the required information referred to above is received within 21 calendar days from the date requested. So we'll send a letter and we'll indicate that the information needs to be provided within 21 days. If a policyholder fails to comply, an assessment based on estimation will be made. So we'll basically look at what the payroll is, and an estimation will be made based on previous year's experience. And such assessments shall be final and not subject to any adjustment. It's further important to note that in terms of Section 80 sub 6 and Section 82 sub 5 of COIDA, a policyholder who fails to comply with the provisions of these sections shall be guilty of an offence. So that's a seriousness of not complying with COIDA, and certainly not complying with the mandate or the notice that supports this audit process. My last slide. What we really want to stress during this process is to ask for cooperation by all of these policyholders that will be identified and that will be participating in this audit. So certainly we urge all policyholders to provide their cooperation during the audit and to ensure an expeditious process and result. So the result and the speed thereof is really determined by cooperation by the policyholders. We ask and we stress the importance thereof. Indeed, from our side as SENA, a partner to FEM, we are committed to respecting and maintaining the privacy and security of your personal information, confidential information, especially those that you will receive during this ROE audit. And it's our undertaking to treat all your personal information as private and confidential, and deal with your information in a lawful manner. With that having been said, I thank you. And we are open for questions if there may be any. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that, Calvin. I think maybe from my side as well, just to say that the process, we will be sending a communication to policyholders, informing them of the procedure in terms of the ROE audits. From my side, we're encouraging policyholders to comply with the request from Center Financial Services, but also the recommendation or the request to Center Financial Services from FEM is that we want this process to be as efficient as possible, and we want to conclude the ROE audits as quickly as possible. So it's a case that we would not want a policyholder to be without a return, without the letter of good standing. So we'll ensure that we will understand the process that's been implemented, but ensuring that you are not going to be compromised in terms of receiving a letter of good standing. But so please do comply with the request from Center Financial Services. We will be sending a communication of the process. That letter will be sent out shortly. The other aspect is that in terms of the ROE audits, just to ensure that some of the member organizations who are on this call as well, to please ensure and encourage your members to comply, and also indicate that it's not just from an FEM perspective, but it's in conjunction with that of the Compensation Fund and Rand Mutual as well, who are also going to be conducting ROE audits as well, to ensure that there's compliance from that perspective. Okay, we'll then conclude on that and move to the question and answers. I see X-Dean has your hand up. Okay, Kirsty, you can go ahead.
Okay, so at the moment we'd have to enable everyone or just some people. I've enabled X-Dean, so he should now be able to unmute his mic, then he can ask his question.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you perfectly.
Oh, cool. Just for the SENA, the person who dealt with the SENA things, I'm new to this, so just all I'm trying to gauge is the earnings. You said all earnings. So what about if you went through a major restructuring and a large chunk of your payroll is related to retrenchment or severance packages? Surely to charge a premium on a severance package is not, I can't see how that works.
Calvin, I'm not sure if you can answer that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question, Extin. Obviously, we will look at a particular year, and if we, in that particular year, have certain headcount, number of employees for that particular employer, we would want the earnings for all of that employees during that particular year. What we will then with information is that we'll obviously compare to what the circumstances were that impacted or affected that particular employee during that particular year. So obviously, if there was a retrenchment and there has been a reduction in number of employees, we'll see that there has been this variance. And all that we need in that regard is simply an explanation as to this happened, and this were the circumstances. And because of, as you indicated, a retrenchment, the headcount dropped, and necessarily what followed was obviously the earnings for a particular year dropped. That would then obviously explain the variance in the earnings that we will identify. So ultimately, we would seek an explanation. An explanation of that would obviously be a plausible one. But if there is a significant drop in the headcount from what was declared and what is the current state without a plausible explanation, then obviously it begs the question as to what transpired. I don't know whether I've answered the question.
If I can just clarify my question, what I wanted to know is, are you assessed on severance pay? So in other words, at least the 2% or whatever the percentage is, does that apply to severance pay, or do you exclude that from your earnings?
I think that will be fixed. That will be excluded from your earnings, because that's a severance pay. It's not your all intents and purposes the earnings that the workman would have earned if he would have had an injury, because obviously the earnings informs the compensation that you would have had. So if one takes the argument that your compensation is based on your earnings, and obviously your earnings would then inform what your ultimate payout would be. So I would then argue that the severance pay would not be regarded as your normal earnings during that particular year. Sanjay?
So if I can add to that as well, perhaps that the regulation or the guidance says that any earnings of a regular nature. And so in your instance of severance pay, that would be paid before he finishes his period of service with you, and it would be not of a regular nature, if you're following. So any earnings of a regular nature need to be declared. If it's like a once-off bonus or something like that, it's not of a regular nature. I don't know, Calvin, if that's helped clarify.
Thanks. That has helped me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Extine. I'm going to, let me just do this and enable Kirsty so she can ask her question. Okay, Kirsty, you should be able to unmute now. Kirsty, are you still with us? Are you able to unmute?
Okay, while we're waiting for Kirsty to talk, I think there's a question from Clinton. In terms of Schedule 4, please give more clarity on when the 90,000 rand is payable to an injured employee. So in terms of the Schedule 4, for example, it applies to an employee who's been permanently disabled, but based on the severity of the disability, it does not exceed 30%. So we have a guideline in terms, for example, if a person loses an arm or a hand, the percentage that applies to that particular disability. So in this instance, for example, if an employee has been, the disability, the permanent disability is at, let's say, 1% severity or 2% severity, the minimum compensation would be 90,000 rands in the form of a lump sum. Hopefully that clarifies.
Okay, I see Glenda also had a hand up. So Glenda, you should now be able to unmute. You can try and then just give us your question.
Hi, yes, I'm also new to this. I just need to know, you mentioned that like subcontractors, all earnings need to be declared. But if I have a subcontractor who comes on with his team, I don't know what he's paying his team in terms of their earnings. So how do I declare that on my return of earnings? Because they wouldn't be on my UIF because they're not on my payroll. I wouldn't be paying SARS anything for their pay as you earn. So how would I account for, on my ROE?
So maybe if I can answer that. So from an ROE perspective that you'll submit to FEM, if your subcontractors have a COIDA cover, and if you have a letter of good standing, then you don't need to declare those employees under your particular policy. I think from a financial services, they just want to ensure that you're declaring the correct earnings. And sometimes where we would find that an employer or a policyholder at FEM may not be declaring the way or the earnings of a subcontractor. But Calvin, maybe you want to clarify it on that basis, but just to confirm that from an FEM perspective, if you have subcontractors on site who are registered for COIDA and have a letter of good standing, then you do not need to declare those earnings on your FEM return of earnings. Thank you. Calvin?
I think perhaps to add as well, if you are covering, so what often happens is for a policyholder, the subcontractor, main contractor, the subcontractor working for a main contractor, your first prize is to get the subcontractor to register his own COIDA policy, whether it's through the fund, RMA, us, wherever it should belong, so that any accidents that happen under that entity do not affect your own policy, because you may have a subcontractor that causes a lot of nonsense, has a lot of accidents, and those costs then ultimately will be for your account or for your COIDA policy, because in terms of the legislation, if a subcontractor that you hire does not have his own COIDA cover, be it with the fund or us or whatever, they are deemed to be your employees. And so if that doesn't happen, then to your question around declaration, you would need to declare them under your policy, because you want to provide cover for them because they don't have their own policy. But if they have their own policy, obviously, then you don't need to include them under your policy. I don't know if that's hopefully helped. And Calvin, have you got any further input on it? If not, then Glenda, were you covered on that?
Yes, yeah, I was. Thank you. Just if I may just ask one. So if I have a subcontractor and he's an individual that does minor maintenance, do I still need to declare whatever I pay over to him, even though he's not on my books, like, you know, permanently employed?
Yeah, so there was another question in the chat that spoke about, well, you've only got 1 or 2 people, and do you need a letter? And the Act basically states that as soon as you have an employee, regardless of how you pay him, it can even be in kind. But as soon as you employ an employee, you are an employer. And as soon as you're an employer, you have to have COID cover. And so therefore, going back to what I said, if you have someone that you take on occasionally, but they have no cover of their own, then they're deemed to be your employees, and you basically have to provide cover for them. And so in terms of declaring their earnings, you know, you can look at your total bill and you're declaring your total bill. And in terms of your number of employees, you're declaring an average. So if you had, for example, 1 person on average per month, maybe 10 different people, but it's only 1 in each month, then on your declaration, you would declare 1 person, because that's what it's been on average through the year. And in that case that you're talking about, where occasionally you take this guy on, you would be included in your numbers and in your wage bill. I don't know if that's helped to make it clearer.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think maybe just to step in, Glenda, so just basically this gives you an indication. So in terms of Section 89, so we won't look at the amendment, but on the current point of it, so let's take it through this particular slide. So where you the main contractor, and if you have a subcontractor that you've engaged with and appointed on site. Okay, so I'm just going to move this up here. So technically, if that particular subcontractor has a valid letter of good standing, is registered for COIDA, then those employees are deemed that of the subcontractor, right? So that subcontractor will then, during his submission of return of earnings, whether it's to compensation fund, RMA or FEM, will then declare those particular earnings for his employees. If that subcontractor is not registered for COIDA, right, he does not have a valid letter of good standing, then those employees are automatically deemed that of the main contractor. So then in this instance, you would then have to declare the earnings of those particular employees under your return of earnings submission through to FEM. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies it, but it's under Section 89 of the COID Act.
Thanks, Sanjay. Kelvin, can you now unmute? My apologies. When I enabled some of the others, I must have dropped you off.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. But yeah, the questions were answered, and I put some comments in the chat, and hopefully in response to some of the questions that was put. But thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, we are just about out of time. I see we still have Barbara with her hand up, so let me quickly, I think she was covered. Let me just double check, Barbara, were you covered? Okay.
No, sorry. I just wanted to find out. So we have two companies. The one is with FEM and the other one is with Compensation Fund. We've been trying since 2019 to get a letter of good standing with Compensation Fund. Is it possible for us to move the other company over to FEM to assist us in getting a letter of good standing and going forward, or is it not possible?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So I think from an FEM perspective, we're only licensed to cover the construction industry, which is class 5. So dependent on whether that particular policy is able to be covered, we certainly will be able to assist with that. So please do reach out to us. And also one of the requirements is that the policy must be in good standing with the compensation fund prior to us transferring it through to FEM. So please do get in touch with one of our regional officers or the consultants, or in fact me as well. I'll be happy to assist you with that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Sanjay.
Barbara.
I think we have answered some of the questions in the chat. There was one about when loadings apply. I did answer it in the chat, but just to clarify, so loadings are only applicable when your policy's performance is bad enough that it affects the rest of the policyholders in that pool. So at that point, you will then start paying loadings. And so at that point, you'll be notified that a loading will be levied against you, and you'll have an opportunity to have that discussion with FEM to see exactly what the situation is. The guys are quite understanding, but it is important that one policyholder doesn't take more out of the pool than he's contributing, as far as that's concerned. That's ultimately what the premium and the mutual nature and then loadings and rebates are all about. We're balancing the pool of money that policyholders are entrusting to us to pay their COIDA liabilities and making sure those are paid appropriately, and then obviously rewarding those or returning to those premium that is in excess of what's required, and obviously having a discussion and with those where the performance is not as good as it should be. And there we can get involved and we can help, we can provide health and safety advice, we can engage our partners in the industry, the MBAs and so on, to try and rectify the situation. So that's basically where loadings apply. I think we are now out of time. I don't know, Sanjay, if you want to close up. I see Clinton's hand is up. Clinton, if you can just post in the chat. We will then get back to you on an answer to your question. We unfortunately are out of time, so I'll leave to Sanjay to close.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gijs, and thank you to all the attendees for joining this webinar. It's certainly been quite an interesting transition from an FEM perspective as well. We basically implementing the new rebate methodology, the ROE audits, the new FEM online. So a lot of innovation, a lot of changes at FEM. So we're thankful for you for being a policyholder of FEM. Please do spread the word. We will be hosting further webinars about the COID Amendment Bill, which is impending. Fairly soon, we expect it to be approved by the presidency, and once it is, hopefully then you will be up to speed in terms of all the amendments that are going to be taking place, not just from an underwriting perspective, but I think also from a claims perspective. So in conjunction with our claims department, we will be hosting webinars and potentially roadshows as well as we progress during this year. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining this webinar. Wishing you all the best. Hopefully it's going to be a very productive year. We're seeing that there is an improvement in terms of sentiment from the policyholders, and wishing you all the best. May you also keep the accidents at a very acceptable or low level. So we always say that zero is no accident, so it's always possible that there can be zero accidents. So thank you and all the best. Bye.
Thanks all. I'll be closing the meeting then now.